Hello, everyone. My name is Charles Xu, and I'm a member of Qiao Collective. As our website states, we are a diaspora Chinese media collective dedicated to challenging US aggression on China. Right now, that diasporic position places me on the West Coast of the United States, where this event starts airing live at the ungodly hour of 6 in the morning. So that's why I'm appearing via pre-recorded video. To my fellow panelists, I look forward to watching all your presentations once I finally wake up, and I regret not being able to have a live dialogue with you. To the organizers of this panel at Friends of Socialist China, we at Qiao are deeply grateful and humbled by the opportunity to appear in such a distinguished lineup. And to our comrades in China and all those around the world who continue to stand with the Chinese Revolution, we send our best wishes on this momentous occasion of the centenary of the founding of the Communist Party. Now, the reason we're all here today is not just to commemorate that anniversary. It's to discuss another milestone that China attained just in time for it, on schedule, in spite of the COVID-19 pandemic, the US trade war, and all the severe economic dislocations they caused. That, of course, is the eradication of absolute poverty, which was announced last November to moderate fanfare in China and dead silence from most Western media. In what little English language coverage I've seen, even from sympathetic sources, there are quite a few stark omissions and, frankly, ahistorical narratives being propagated. So I think there's no better occasion than now, as we're celebrating the full 100-year history of the Communist Party of China in its totality to set the record straight. One very common pitfall I've noticed is to consider the reform and opening period in isolation, to treat poverty alleviation as a project limited to the post-Mao period, or worse, somehow going against the grain of Mao-era policy. Nothing could be further from the truth. That narrative erases or actively denigrates the agrarian roots of the Chinese Revolution and the titanic social transformations of the first 3 decades of the People's Republic, which were pioneered, of course, in the CPC's rural base areas for the 2 decades preceding. To combat this line, I personally find it very useful to turn to Max Eil, who is one of the most profound and original thinkers today on the subjects of agrarian socialism and national liberation. If you allow me, I'd like to quote liberally from a Twitter thread that he posted when China officially certified the eradication of extreme poverty this past March. Quote, "I have to say it makes me a little uneasy to see a lot of the anti-imperialist, pro-state sovereignty left referring to China's lifting 800 million people out of poverty using the World Bank's PPP adjusted measure, and seldom with discussion of the revolutionary pre-1978 policies. What China did from 1949 to 1978 was what was truly remarkable and set a gold standard for poverty reduction, measured in regular access to use values, primary capital formation, breaking food availability constraints, spreading healthcare and education. What China did most fundamentally was redistribute the land and more or less non-coercively reorganize rural labor to continually enhance rural food and agricultural production while mobilizing people power and capital for sovereign industrialization. That was a miracle, measured in enhanced and continually rising per capita access to fundamental use values needed for humane life, and it laid the basis for later growth. What is perhaps even more important is that what China did in 1949 to 1978 is the model the rest of the poor world needs to try to follow today. Updated for our times, but shattering the export-oriented agricultural model, moving to internal food sovereignty and low-cost investments in health and education, and also mobilizing labor and rural surplus for industrialization. Post-1978 China offers a different kind of positive lesson about the retention of state capacity for planning and investment decisions in a far less welcoming environment as the vies tightened on third and second world national projects." End quote. The late great Samir Amin, in a characteristically perceptive and prescient monthly review article entitled China 2013, also emphatically stated that Mao-era developmental policies laid the foundations for China's post-1978 rise. Quote, "To say, as one hears ad nauseum, that China's success should be attributed to the abandonment of Maoism, whose failure was obvious, the opening to the outside, and the entry of foreign capital, is quite simply idiotic. The Maoist construction put in place the foundations without which the opening would not have achieved its well-known success. To say that China's success is mainly even completely attributable to the initiatives of foreign capital, is no less idiotic. It is not multinational capital that built the Chinese industrial system and achieved the objectives of urbanization and the construction of infrastructure. The success is 90% attributable to the sovereign Chinese project, end quote. In other words, we must treat the elimination of poverty as a project spanning the entire sweep of revolutionary Chinese history, starting in 1949 and indeed earlier in the CPC's base areas. True, it's a project broken into two phases, only the second of which was explicitly framed as such, as a matter of state policy. But we must hold fast to the revolutionary achievements of the first Maoist phase too. We must not discount the importance of sweeping land reform, of rural collectivization that met in most cases with the enthusiastic support of the peasantry, of securing a basic modicum of shelter, food, education, and public health as fundamental and decommodified rights. And we have to recognize that because these basic human necessities were so widely decommodified, in other words, not subject to the law of value, they do not figure into the GDP or income calculations from that period. But those social gains were no less real, no less foundational to the drive to eradicate quantitative and qualitative poverty, and no less valuable to revolutionaries today. Indeed, as Max Eil points out, they probably provide even more useful direct lessons to those waging struggles for land and human dignity in the global South, because those achievements were secured before China enjoyed, as it does today, the state capacity and economic might to discipline both foreign and domestic capital toward the ends of national development. They were the fruits of the Jiangxi Soviet, the Long March, Yan'an, and the formative struggles of the Communist Party before it took power nationally. They made possible the modern day Chinese exception to global self-dependency and neocolonialism. All that said, I do have to push back gently on one of Max Eil's opening points. It's entirely true that Western coverage of recent achievements in poverty alleviation, even coming from left outlets that are broadly sympathetic to China, does fixate on the adjusted World Bank income threshold. Unfortunately, this framing plays directly into mainstream narratives that paint Chinese state policy initiatives as technocratic, quantitative, and top-down in nature. Now, when compared to the highly legible and highly visible and routine mass mobilizations of the Mao era, I do understand where this reputation comes from. But the deeply textured, deeply human, lived reality of poverty alleviation in rural China thoroughly belies this narrative. And to truly understand it on its own terms, we have to turn to detailed local accounts of the epochal transformations that have happened in everyday village life. This is where Qiao Collective's own contributions come in the form of two notable translations that we published last year. The first is the Metamorphosis of Yuangu Dui, a moving portrait of one of the most desperately poor villages in Gansu province. At the outset, in 2013, so emblematic is the village of Yuangu Dui of rural Chinese poverty that locals know success there would propagate all the way up the administrative hierarchy to have national significance. Families are quoted as saying, quote, if only Yuangu Dui could cast off poverty, and you could consider Dingxi as having cast off poverty. If only Dingxi could cast off poverty, then you could consider Gansu as having cast off poverty. If only Gansu could cast off poverty, then China would more or less have succeeded in truly casting off poverty, end quote. I can't fully do it justice in the time I have, but the rest of the essay covers in lyrical detail the concrete realities of poverty alleviation for the residents of Yuangu Dui. The construction of functional roads linking the village to the nearest town, the revival and rapid completion of a long dormant aqueduct supplying potable water, the building of secure houses for over 300 households, the establishment of collective village enterprises as varied as solar power, agritourism, and sheep rearing, the overturning of patriarchal norms in cultural production. The triumph of Yuangu Dui over absolute poverty, secured well ahead of schedule, entailed all of this and more in just 6 years. And that is the story that gets left out when we examine poverty alleviation through the lens of per capita income alone. Yuangu Dui may have been something of a poster child, but many aspects of its experience were hardly atypical. This is abundantly clear from our second translation entitled, What Does It Mean to Eradicate Absolute Poverty?, which includes the official criteria and procedures for delisting households, villages, and counties as being in absolute poverty. For individual households, the criteria include not just income, but also, quote, food and clothing security, access to compulsory education, guaranteed basic healthcare, and safe housing. This shows that the attention to qualitative use values remains undiminished in the actual implementation of poverty alleviation. So too does the primacy of grassroots initiative. Delisting of households requires the input of both the village-level CPC branch and a village committee formed and governed by the local residents themselves, as well as the village as a whole. This gives a lie to Western portrayals of poverty alleviation as an act of top-down central government fiat. I want to conclude by mentioning another common thread running through the Yuan Gudui piece in particular, which is the prevalence of martial language. Housing, transport, water, and so on are described as battlefields on which campaigns are launched against absolute poverty. Superficially, this rhetoric bears a resemblance to, for example, the Johnson administration's stated war on poverty in the US. But as we well know, that war was launched in conjunction with other figurative wars on crime and later on drugs, as well as the very literal US war on Vietnam. As Ruth Wilson Gilmore and other abolitionists remind us, under capitalist imperialism, poverty is a structural necessity that can at best be regulated, but never eliminated, by a regime of military Keynesianism, or, since the end of the Cold War, carceral Keynesianism. Accumulation here in the imperial core requires abject destitution, starvation, and premature death on a genocidal scale in the global South. But China's path to zero poverty shows emphatically that there is another way. In the Mao era, agrarian revolution enabled titanic land reforms and the decommodification and universal provision of basic necessities. The reform and opening period has secured the country's economic might by conventional metrics as well, but crucially without subjecting itself or other nations to the geopolitical dominion of Western capital. In so doing, China's success creates vital breathing room for nations and people's movements in the global South to put its own revolutionary lessons into practice. In this sense, the eradication of absolute poverty is not just a fitting culmination of the Communist Party's first century of existence. It is the Chinese people's greatest gift to the world.